Okay, so firstly, thank you very much for staying around. Last session of the day. You can't hear? Do you want to try a different set of headphones? Maybe one in front of you? I had that problem earlier. Thank you for staying around. That means either you've really enjoyed the conference, you're really enthusiastic, or you've missed your train. And you may as well stay around and have a cup of coffee. Hopefully the former. So I'm going to say a little bit about risk management, and it's not a dry subject at all, this, by the way, some really exciting stuff here. But before we do, let's just introduce the panelists. We're going to throw some of your sticky questions at this team. So on the far left there, you've got Tim Mulray, TSA. You've got Steve Gates from Taking Care, Stuart Barkley from Via Care, and you've also got Aaron Edwards from Tech Kimru. So very good panel for you. Let's start with the risk management. And even here, I need to start with a thank you. This whole piece of work and the data you're about to see came from you. So many of you contributed to this survey during 2021. And I'm just going to give you some quick insights as to what it means. Firstly, I should explain how TSA views this material. I think you'll have seen that wonderful picture from Alison around care models and how it all fits together. Lots of components, that care model, which has taken a lot of building over time. And part of the puzzle there is resolved by special interest groups, you joining these groups and solving particular problems. They might be technical, they might be service-oriented in nature, but we're feeding this continual development, improving the quality of that care model over time. And that comes from these working groups. There's one particular working group, which is relevant to today, which is, we call it SIG 14, who cares? But that really was this review of risks in our sector from last year. So, and this is where I thank you for your contributions to that risk. So I'm going to quickly play back a summary of what we found last year. The kind of dry and dusty list is this, so the top 10. I'm not going to read those to you. I'll just leave it there for a moment so you can glance the topics. But actually, when you work your way through that top 10, quite a few of them are being addressed by special interest groups and working activity within TSA already. Some of them a bit more challenging. And I just want to, for a moment, focus on those, probably top 3. So these are short-term risks. What is hitting us in our sector in the next 1 to 2 years? Inevitably, what you've got is a lot of stuff emerging around interoperability. So that the notion that everything should be able to connect. So if you've got devices close to an end user, that needs to connect to some sort of communication device, like a hub device, onwardly to some monitoring center, and actually beyond that, to provide data into shared care records, for example. Each of those legs along the way are quite challenges of interoperability, and we're not well covered at the moment. So when you look at the gaps, the question here is whether we, TSA and you in the sector, probably need to do more. We need to probably another separate activity, a special interest group activity, just on interoperability. And this time, not just within a telecare system, for example, do centers talk to all the different boxes, but actually onwards to the ARC platforms and certainly into the care record systems. So there's more we can do there is one of the challenges. The digital propositions one comes up time and time again, so we can't leave it without mentioning it. I guess the challenge for TSA here is, do we need to go again? Do we have to refocus and work even harder to get this one over the line? And then the last of the 3 headliners for the short term is this whole, people are referring to the 3 Ps, this idea of personalized, proactive, preventative care, rather than necessarily reliance on the traditional reactive wait for alarms. And one of the challenges that's been put to TSA is we've not done enough yet, certainly in terms of guidance on what good looks like. But actually, do we need some standards as well? Do we need some common standards as how we behave in that world? They're the short-term risks, so well done on contributing to those. For those who completed the survey, you may remember we also looked at longer-term or emergent risks, where the timeline was more like 2 to 5 years. So again, there's a top 10. It's a slightly different list this time. And again, I'm not going to bore you by making you read every one of those numbers. So let's pick out the top 3 items again. What now emerges is co-production. If we don't address this as TSA in the sector, and there are good examples, don't get me wrong, but universally, are we well placed in terms of engaging with the consumer, the end user, and co-producing what we do? will we still be fit for purpose in the market if we don't address that point? Can TSA do more? Is the way that was expressed as a challenge. The second one on there is data. Actually, I'd much rather talk about information, as those of you in the last panel session will know. We've got technology, shiny boxes, great, but what's really important is getting data out of those boxes and getting it to somewhere useful so service can act upon it. And data itself's not enough. We need to analyze data. We need to turn it into information, something that informs our service activity. And this is one where we got a lot of feedback to say there's quite a big hole there. We're not giving enough support on what to do in terms of accessing that data. And of course, there's some precursors here. If we've not solved things like interoperability and shared care records and so on, we're probably on a sticky wicket with that anyway. And last but not least, we've got issues of security and data protection. This is almost the dark side, the flip side of everything that's good with digital. As soon as you go digital, inevitably start asking questions about, is it secure? What do we do? And we've got some guidance on that, but again, the great challenge was maybe we need to do more, and there is already work in progress on that one. The parting shot is also quite a few of the short-term risks carried over into your views of what will be persist up to year 5. So we won't rewind on those. So what we're going to do now, we're going to come back to these top 6 topics a little bit later and ask you to vote on them. And really, we're looking for you to influence the next stages of TSA work. You get your own view here as to how to prioritize those work programs. But hold that thought, because I'll bring it back to haunt you a little bit later. But what we're going to do at this stage is engage the panelists. So we've got some questions that have come in already, and you're more than welcome to put your hands up, submit questions now as we go through. I think just to save time, I'll start by throwing 1 or 2 of the questions that are already there. So close by saying thank you for the work you did so far last year. I will circle back, probably with Steve Gates' help, to say what's happening next with risk management full stop, but we'll do that at the end of the presentation. So if you don't mind, I'll pick off 1 or 2 of the questions that have come in, if I can open this thing. I think this first one, it's probably going to go, where we go, Aaron's way, I guess. So one of the questions that we asked, it stems from the whole world of digital, and the question is, are we missing the key risk in shifting to digital? Actually, isn't this as much about the opportunity to improve and redesign services? And if so, how can telecare services be supported in their redesign of services? Is it fair to throw that one at you, Aaron?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's a bit weird talking with the headphones on. So
have you mic'd up?
Can you not hear me?
Good.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a really good question. So we've split it off from a Tech Cymru perspective. So we've set a lofty ambition of getting all of the 7 alarm receiving centres in Wales digital by the end of 2023. So it's quite tricky, but we're not in this position, say Scotland are, where they've got 22 arcs to navigate, and God knows how many England have got. Tim will probably be able to fill you in on that one. So we've split it into 2 ways. Digitalisation, which is the MVP, the minimum viable product, which is simply changing the connection nodes and being able to take calls digitally. But it's got to be more than that. And as we don't necessarily have a mandate in Tech Cymru to tell services you have to upgrade, it's more of a best practice and a steer towards digitalisation. We've developed 4 sort of supporting projects that touched on the risks there, Steve, about data and more importantly, the information. So the beyond digital is the incentivization for services to upgrade. So they're broken down into 4 key themes, one of which is citizen journey. And apologies if you were in the talk earlier, because I feel like it's a bit of deja vu. I'm going over the same stuff. So citizen journey is the big one. So that's the touch points from onboarding a service user right the way through to decommission. So who do they interact with along the way in terms of allied sectors, so third sector, primary care, secondary care, etc. And that's supported by 3 main sub-projects, which is developing a set of minimum telecare data standards at point of data ingest. So that's the first bit. Put good data in, you get good data out. Following on from data ingest and the development of those minimum telecare standards is the development of a national common telecare record, which is more the data exhaust. So that's enabling services to have active integration with third-party allied sectors, so healthcare, professionals, etc., and being able to pick elements of the telecare record off. And if anyone wants to look into that a little bit more, Norway have got a very, very good model of that. So my boss is in the front row trying to get a cheeky road trip to Norway. Hopefully he's listening up. So so they're the 2 kind of like exhaust and ingest bits that are probably quite, not easy, but the national common telecare record, going back to that, will be a top-down approach. So using the All Wales view of the National Data Resource Centre, so the NDR, that's what we need to focus on, is make sure that's a top-down technical standard, not bottom-up, because it needs to be done at national level. And in between that is the investment in a business intelligence dashboard. So that's the automation of the importance and the efficacy of a telecare service on a day-to-day basis. So looking at things like ROI and the avoidance costs and savings costs for allied sectors as well. So we want to try and incentivize it. We don't want to fund everyone's ARC upgrade because it's going to be very, very expensive, but we're working with our good friends in the Vale of Glamorgan over there to develop these as local proof of concept notions and ideas before we rapidly scale and spread. So it's about pointing out the benefits, Steve, to go back to your original question, not just focusing on the migration itself, because that is just the means to an end.
Thank you, Aaron. Good response. Okay. I think I'm just going to have to throw Tim in the deep end here, actually. It's quite a sticky question. It says, TSA recently released a statement that requests no further purchase of new analog-only telecare equipment, but that involves a significant increase in capital and operational cost. Has the TSA gone too far? Tim, can you tackle that one?
Possibly. So I guess we've... we didn't just sort of come up with that statement out of the blue. It's something that's been in discussion for probably 18 months, and we've taken a lot of advice from experts in the predominantly in the communication providers, so the likes of BT, Openreach and Virgin as network providers, and also the NICC, who basically operate the technical interoperability of the UK telecommunications network. And they were saying to us, we don't, to the best of our knowledge, they don't feel that analog tone protocols will continue to operate with the reliability and efficacy that they do at the moment in the predominantly analog network. So their advice to us was, whilst the testing has happened, and in general, I haven't seen a lot of the data from the testing, but I'm being told that in summary, the testing is generally good at the moment on current networks. They feel that over time it will deteriorate, and if people kind of cling on to that analog only stuff long into the migration beyond 2025, then they feel it's a bit of a dead end, in the sense that actually if things start to fail quite quickly, a lot of organisations with a lot of equipment will all of a sudden start having to panic and reverse decisions that have been made. So on the back of that advice, we obviously consulted, took that decision to say we recommend no further purchase of analog only equipment. So it wasn't to say everyone needs to be digital tomorrow, but it's okay to start buying hybrid equipment, for example, rather than, so at least you can begin on an analog protocol and then move it over to digital at the appropriate time when your control center maybe accepts digital calls, for those that haven't got that in place at the moment. So that's why we took those steps, knowing full well that would mean potentially an increase in capital cost and revenue cost on the back of that, and also the risk that people will get priced out of the market if they are private funders or if they're private payers, and they say actually this is just too expensive. We do run the risk of excluding people from that. So it was a very serious decision, but we felt it was one ultimately that we needed to take to start to encourage service providers down that road of analog to digital at the pace that they can cope with, if that makes sense.
Thank you, but you may need to take a quick follow-on question on that as well. It's closely related, so we may as well cover it now. Our main supplier of telecare equipment has informed us that analog telecare equipment has been tested and will work reliably on digital lines. Is this the case?
I haven't seen the data. However, that's what I'm being informed by those that have done testing. So a number of customers have gone there and done that. What they tend to say is, yeah, we've done the testing with BT, and BT to BT, for example, tends to be fine. It gets a little bit of a grayer area when you look at some of the resellers, like the TalkTalks and the Skies, where their networks aren't as, without getting too technical, the interconnections between networks are not as robust and reliable, because ultimately they guarantee kind of voice only and not tones. So it's not, I don't think it's fair to say, and from what I know, the testing that's taken place in Openreach, for example, where you've got multiple facilities like BT, Sky, Zen, Vodafone, TalkTalk, there are a variety of results that have come back. It's not we've tested everything and everything works fine. We've tested BT works fine. We've tested Vodafone works fine, but maybe we've tested something else and it's not quite there. So unless you've got a good understanding of your customer base in terms of, well, we know that Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Jones are on BT, but someone else is on Sky, and therefore it might be more of a risk to put an analog unit into a Sky customer. That's the kind of detail you're having to go into. So I don't think it's fair to say everything works blanket. I think there are shades of grey in that statement.
I think, to be fair, I sat in the session upstairs yesterday where John Livermore was talking from Openreach, and he was very black and white about this. You should not be using analog kit on digital networks, full stop.
Yes.
He went on to talk about the fact you don't have battery backup anyway, because
Yes.
you lose the router and so on.
Yes.
So, okay, so it's a problem regardless.
Yeah, it's and that's, so there's that sort of side of it is the battery backup comes into play again, where if you've got an analog bit of kit going into the back of a router and the power goes and the router isn't backed up, then ultimately that unit cannot communicate, and you will be that person won't be able to get to the outside world, and that's a whole other section of the reason why it's risky to go down that route. But some services are looking at that risk and kind of accepting that risk and mitigating it in whatever way they can. But ultimately, that's a decision for individuals to take.
Okay, we have got a whole bunch. Sorry, Steve, go on.
Yeah.
Just in a sense to add to that, I think when the TSA originally produced their guidance, it was all, interestingly, we're talking about risk. It was about you should take a risk-assessed approach to your estate. So you're absolutely right, Tim. We've gone and done all of the legacy units that we monitor. We've done the 5 telephone lines. We've done the 3 different communication protocols they're using, and can tell you exactly in which order we're going to have to start to replace those units once there starts to become issues.
Yes.
But I would, in a sense, he's clearly far more knowledgeable than I am, but the testing does not suggest it's binary, on, off, work, won't work. That's a combination of comms protocols, units, and, as you say, different phone lines.
Yeah.
And actually, even the loading of the network will ultimately affect performance of those devices. So, yeah, okay. We'll perhaps give Tim a rest. There's actually loads of digital questions, so if we get time, we'll come back to some of those. There's one I think would usefully target Steve Gates. So this was, you remember, one of the risks was around whether we're supporting the whole notion of proactive services well enough. One of the questions here is, proactive services have emerged during COVID-19. Will they persist after the pandemic, and who will pay for them? Are you okay to take on?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right, Steve. They've started. I think they've got to persist, and they've got to persist for the reason that we've heard over this conference, that the improvement in health outcome from proaction and prevention can be absolutely massive. And I've been sort of buoyed up by the examples that I've heard of what we as a tech sector are doing in terms of proactive and prevention. Someone said to me, the NHS and social care at a strategic level, when they talk about prevention, they said it's a bit like teenage sex. They said everyone's talking about it, everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so they say they're doing it, but in reality, no one is. And I think we should be encouraged as an industry, we can actually show that we're doing it. So I think, A, it's got to persist. Who's going to pay for it? I think is a really big question. I think there's twofold. One, our consumers are already paying for it. And as an organisation that primarily looks after individual customers that have chosen to dip their hand into their own pocket, I can tell you that consumers are willing to pay for our services, and they're willing to pay for prevention and proactivity as well. So I think that will be part of the answer. The second part, Ian McBeath spoke here yesterday, and he said, as part of the ADAS Commission, he said, we should recognise with social care that when somebody interacts with us, often it's because they've reached a point of crisis. And that's despite the fact there have been a number of connections with different parts, often the health system, not social care, before they arrive at social care's door. And equally the fact that they themselves, and we're all doing it, are monitoring a whole range of their own health data. And his challenge was a really big one in terms of that interoperability, that how do we take that health data, which shows that someone's personal situation is declining, up to the point they're about to reach crisis, so we can get to them sooner. Because we all know it's far more expensive to interact when they're in crisis than it is previously. And that's where social care and health have to have a really big grown-up conversation, because they're going to have to say we're going to need to fund prevention properly. But as I said, I think from all the examples we've heard over this conference as an industry, I think we can genuinely say that we are stepping up to the mark in that preventive, proactive space.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Steve. This one, I'll just tip you off, Aaron. This might be coming your way first, actually, but it's probably one that Stuart and Tim might want to comment on. I'm just giving you headspace so you can be thinking about this. The question was that we've seen a lot of focus on digital devices, the devices that are out connected with people in their homes and the connectivity to them. But can we also explain in simple terms why we should be using cloud or SaaS, software as a service? So rather than installing monitoring centres on sites, is there a smarter way to do this? So the question really is, should we be doing that, and what are the benefits? Can I start? Are you okay with that one, Aaron?
Yeah, fine. We've recently completed our blueprint where we've advocated for the use of SaaS. We see it as the next sort of generation ARC sort of software, and goes cap and glove with obviously the digital migration. Some of the high-level advantages is that SaaS models are very scalable. The maintenance is incredibly low as well. There's minimum kind of impact on hardware. So your valuable server space back. You don't need a primary, secondary server. Don't need a CTI server. It's all hosted in the cloud in sort of data centers. One of the biggest things for me, and something that I'm really enthused about getting started with, is the development of shared tenancy models for SaaS going forward. So a lot of these SaaS ARCs now are what we call multi-tenanted. So effectively, it makes no sense going back to the way in which we used to operate in an Analogue environment, where I used to work for Cardiff Council. I'm upgrading and spending close to six figures over sort of a 3-year contract to upgrade my ARC platform, and so is a neighbouring local authority. Well, if a neighbouring local authority has now gone SaaS, it's sort of a strength in numbers. Let's try and be flexible with our kind of procurement approach. So, local authority A in Wales has recently gone to SaaS. Local authority B is looking at SaaS. It doesn't make any sense to the public purse in Wales for them to enter into their own agreement with that provider. It makes sense for them to talk to the company who's already working with SaaS, the other local authority, and club their connection numbers together, because the model of cost now is centered around connection numbers. So, local authority A's got 2,500 connections, local authority B's got 5,000. Join up and get a more favourable rate, and you can start looking at developing regional sort of footprints supplemented by SaaS. And what that allows you to then do is be very flexible with your call routing, so disaster recovery becomes just fairly quick as opposed to fairly arduous at the moment. And sticking a smart diver over, God knows I should have to do it every month with BT. There's a lot of more flexibility, Steve. And I think I've been trying to sort of get that narrative across on the stand this week, that multi-tenanted and SaaS platforms are the way of the future, and a way also to start developing more regional collaborative models as well. So there's a lot of benefits.
Okay, thank you. I will give the other panelists a chance to join in on that one in a moment, but just make mention of these special interest groups. There is one called Special Interest Group number 8, which is it sounds a bit techie, I guess it is, but it's looking at the resilience, how reliable monitoring centres are. And one of their big debates has been exactly this. Should we have physical installations of our monitoring centres, or should we all have it in the cloud? And they're finding it a lot easier to put the standards and high levels of availability against the cloud implementations. It's a lot harder to switch off, as you say, and redirect and reconnect to a different physical disaster recovery centre. So that's something that's coming our way from SIG8. Do you want to add anything, guys, on that point about cloud data, like cloud hosting?
Procurements I've been involved with over the last couple of years, I guess. It seems to be more of an IT decision around that. So it's in part the Analog to Digital guidance that we distributed at the end of last year. We we talked about the stakeholders that get involved in these overall procurement decisions, and it's IT that are saying, actually, we want SaaS. We don't want these great, bits of kit like sitting in a room somewhere on our property that we're having to manage access control for, and cooling and heating and whatever else that needs to be done in terms of infrastructure. They want that kind of managed off-site by something else, with the cybersecurity side of things taken care of there and all that sort of thing. So I think that's been the main driver. If you were to ask me which is better, SaaS seems like it's more progressive and more more effective. But then if someone said, actually, we're determined to have our own kit on site, we want to physically see what it is and we're happy to manage that, then I think that's okay.
Okay. Actually, I may as well stay. Sorry.
No, I was just going to add, in terms of, actually, Tim's raised a really important point. One of the issues and the challenges we have with analog to digital is security and cyber security. And suddenly, as you start to hold information in the cloud, as you're transferring it between different platforms, the requirement for a really robust cybersecurity approach goes up and up and up.
Yeah.
So I think where you are working in that cloud environment, it's to ensure you've got a really good cybersecurity which sits around it.
Yeah.
Because these new digital platforms are inevitably more interesting to hackers than the older analog ones were.
Yeah.
So I think we need to do that in parallel.
And especially with a multi-tenanted approach.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
All that access, shared data and things.
Obviously, we're talking about.
So let's go across to Stuart. If the mic's on, please.
Sorry. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. I won't sing. It's interesting. We're all talking about ARCs, and where we think about from VIR's perspective, it's another cloud, it's another dashboard, it's another platform. We can do updates over the air, and I agree with what everyone's saying here. Absolutely, I remember the disaster recovery at Edinburgh, and it was a nightmare, but it was good fun. But I suppose what the other thing we really need to think about is that single shared login. There's nothing worse than having lots of applications, whether it be the ARCs or whether it be other applications, and you're having to log in with different logins and everything else. It needs to be that interoperability needs to disappear overnight. I talked about it yesterday, and we've talked about it for 20 years, I suppose, but I think we're getting closer and closer, and I think we need to embrace that so we can offer these choices. But yeah, the work done so far is great, and I agree with what everyone's saying.
Just maybe, Tim, while we're on the subject of ARCs, there is a closely related one. It's kind of back to the digital discussion again. But the question is, we have an analog ARC capable of making and receiving only analog calls with no definitive data as to when our ARC will be made digital. How can we begin this journey, this migration to digital? What's the logical start point? Can you answer that one?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I would say is obviously engage with your supplier. I can't imagine who you would be talking about, but let's say it's a specific supplier, and you would say, look, we're taking on board what you're saying about things are in development and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's to try and, you might come down to when your contract is up for re-sign. So let's say you've got, re-sign in 6 months or whatever, or there's milestones within your contract. So is to try and put some definitive dates in there that we want by this date to see this level of development, because I think my concern is obviously there's 1 or 2 platforms out there that need to do this work, and once they've got it developed, it's then how quickly they're going to roll it out. So you might be looking at, okay, if this provider says, right, by Christmas this year we've got digital, but we've got 60, 100 ARCs and we're going to roll it out, and it's going to take us 4 years to roll it out. So where are you going to be in that kind of rollout plan? That could be 2 years down the line. So what I would say is get something definitive in your contract, that if they've going to promise you something, you get a hard date in there and with some hard outcomes, and if those outcomes aren't met, then you can potentially break the contract, or you can take whatever action you want to take on the back of them not meeting that deadline. In the meantime, well, I'll go back to this hybrid device discussion. There are devices out there that are capable of doing analog and digital. So you can start to procure devices and roll out devices initially that will be communicating in analog, but at some point in the future, you can switch those over remotely into a digital protocol. So you're starting to get on that journey. There is a challenge there maybe where you say, well, okay, how do we know that the device we're going to buy is going to be compatible with our future digital version of the platform that we're on? And that's a good question. And you've got to, again, kind of make that decision. So do a bit of soft market testing or whatever, and get some commitment or some proof that there's interoperable protocols and things like that that are going to be deployed. So you know that you're investing in a device that is in the short term going to work with the platform now and in the future, and then you can start to get on the road. It's not ideal, but it's a way of getting started and starting to migrate your estate over to digital and make it as easy as possible, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Tim. I think this probably next one goes to Steve Gates. You've talked about multiple and quite different risks. How do you go about assessing them and prioritising action? I think probably a good one for you, is it, Steve? Is that? Do you want to save that for your last slide, even?
I think let's save it for the last slide. I think that's exactly what we're going to talk about.
Fine. Okay, we'll do that. We'll hold on. Whoever asked that one, sorry. There's a very specific one for Aaron. Are the deadlines for upgrading all Welsh ARCs to digital by the end of 2023 realistic?
I hope so. Yes, I would say so. We've just obviously agreed a collaboration agreement with Veilig Glamorgan, who are the first in Wales to go SaaS. We've got funding from Welsh Government to pay for the first 12 months running costs on that. So that's commitment from central government, which is great. Music to everyone's ears, isn't it? And effectively, those projects I mentioned earlier, more about the beyond digital stuff, is the fun stuff. The actual migration is the hard stuff. But we can't position ourselves as experts when it comes to a migration unless we're physically in the trenches with Gary and co in the Vale. We've got to get in there and get mucky with it. And what we'll do ultimately, post go live, which will be June, we've got a series of milestone reports built in. We're already on halfway towards number 2, where we adopt the lessons learned approach and we share that through our governance forums, telecare programme board that we've got in Wales that meets every 6 weeks, telecare working group, that's kind of a segue from the Assistive Technology Learning Improvement Network, that also meets every 6 weeks. So it is realistic, I would say. But yeah, it's going to be fun. We're looking forward to working with the Vale, and once we've kind of mapped it from procurement or pre-procurement, at the minute, to go back to a question you just asked of Tim, we're currently looking at a pre-migration plan. So anyone who's thinking of upgrading in the next 6 months, we'll give them a series of documentation about proprietary protocols, etc., and likely things that they can remove from the critical path when it comes to managing that specific migration project. So once we've done that, we effectively helicopter that learning into neighbouring local authorities in Wales, and then we eventually tackle the beasts of the 2 ARCs that we've got, that representative of 50,000 of our 77,000 connections in Wales, because we want to start fairly smallish with the Vale. It's the smallest ARC in Wales, and take that lessons learned approach to some of the more big existing shared tenancy models, which will present a lot more risk to the migration.
So I'm taking that as an optimistic yes, you're going to be ready.
Always optimistic, Steve.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Even if I haven't got a plan, I'll tell you I have.
Great.
But no, we've got a plan. We've got a plan. Yeah.
Well, what I suggest at this stage is looking through. We're getting more questions which get increasingly digital in nature, and I might just hold off on those because we're throwing a lot at Tim. Are any of you here wanting to raise questions that haven't been putting questions in via the app? Anybody want to raise their hand, get a microphone roaming? Have we missed any key topic? Going back to the big issue of the wider topic of risks. Any burning questions? I think we've covered everything. Okay, so what we might do at this stage, any parting shots on what we've heard so far? Can we move back to the slides? Yep, okay. So if the gang are up for that, we should be able to look at next steps. So I did thank you for your involvement during 2021 in the whole risk survey. We are going to go again. In fact, the TSSA Quality Improvement Board, Alison, has asked for us to do this as an annual exercise because it gives a real good picture of how mature is the sector. We are going to talk a little bit in a moment about how we respond to last year's survey. There's a bit more information coming your way in a minute. We're also going to talk about a toolkit for risk management, which we're going to make available to members. And I think I'll leave Steve to talk about that one in a moment. You will see invitations to get involved with SIG 14 and that risk survey activity this year. That'll be coming up again during the summer. But by the way, all of these special interest groups, they're open for your involvement. So if you're interested in any of this stuff, just contact any of the TSA team and we'll direct you to the special interest groups. Last but not least, all of this ends up impacting on things like the guidance material and the quality standards that TSA uses to push quality forward in the sector. So later this year, we'll also be making recommendations for tightening up on the quality standards process to include risk management processes. But now it's your time to make some decisions. So those were the top 6, if you remember them, from the short term and the long term. So I'm going to ask you to poll on that. You're probably used to this by now. This is probably the last poll of the conference. Really, we're after your view, this audience, to dictate where next. Where do Alison and the team focus a lot of efforts in the coming year? So have a think about it. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to mull that over before we bring the results up. And while we're doing that, should we cover Steve? Can you cover off the work on the toolkit? I should say, Steve's doing a great job with the team, the SIG 14 team. He actually chairs that group. And there's some great stuff coming out of there, but I shan't steal your thunder. Maybe you can do it from there if you like, if I put the slide up for you, whichever's easiest.
I'll get up if that's all right.
Whichever's
Just
easiest.
to stretch my legs. This, in a part, goes back to the question that Steve raised earlier, which I think is, there'll be some of you that are really, really into risk management and have got your risk universe and your risk frameworks and everything else like that. And there'll be others who are going, right, we know we need to do it because we can understand the importance of it, but where do we start? So we've spent some time within the SIG wrestling with this as a question. And as chair, Taking Care are both very fortunate and cursed to be owned by AXA. AXA are the 6th largest financial services group in the world. So there is what they don't know about risk management, that's their day-to-day business, could be written on the back of a stamp. So Steve and I have made the strategic decision which says, let's not reinvent the wheel, let's plunder what's already there, and let's reintroduce that to you as a TSA membership in terms of a series of templates for you to use, for you to adjust, to make appropriate for your organization. There is never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, but we will talk to you about things such as where on that maturity scale are you at the moment and what are the next steps. There'll be a template about how to identify all of the risks that you as an organization are facing, what we call the risk universe, and how you think about their impact and their likelihood. And having done that, how you think about, well, if we don't want them to occur, let's do something now. How do we mitigate it now? So we'll have a template about the risk universe. We'll have a template that allows you to then map your risks. So again, when you're talking to your senior management, your board, you can be really clear as to how important the various different risks are for you. And then finally, we'll give you a template as well in terms of if there's an incident, if there's a risk incident, you might call it a near-miss report, right? These are the types of things that your new risk committee might like to know about, because it didn't impact us this time, but we've got some learnings. That means that we can improve to make sure it doesn't impact us next time as well. So as Steve said, we wanted to be really practical because this is a big and hairy subject. Lots of people spend their entire lives doing that. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is to steal from them and bring it to you as a TSA membership. So that's the intention.
There's a couple more. Oh yeah, there we go.
And then, there's the other one. For those of you who like the external accreditations, again, ISO 3001 is the one that you would think about in terms of if you want to be accredited for risk management. And again, once we move through, what we're hoping to do is start to align some of the standards within the QSF with what would be needed for that ISO 3001. So again, from a QSF perspective, we're starting you off down that road in an appropriate way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Right, I'm hoping at this point, this wonderful guy called Simon behind the scenes can put the results of the poll up, if you can hear me. Whoa, we've got it. So which is which? Interesting. So your top 2 are all around personalization, proactive care, and interoperability. Digital propositions coming in 3rd place. Sorry, Tim, you've been relegated. We can stop asking you questions. That's really interesting. So yeah, so actually you're putting interoperability way up at the top of the list. So that's a good point to close. Thank you very much for your input. We really will take that into discussions of the work programs. And at that point, we're going to end this session and hand back over to Alison and Stuart to close the stage. So thank you very much for all your time.
I think this is just a real close and I just want to thank Bayer again for sponsoring this opportunity of having this right in the heart of the exhibition. I think it's been packed with wonderful content for the few days that we've been here. I'm going to close by, you won't have been in the main plenary, and we had Lord Victor Abouari, who's the the chair of NHS Confed. He was absolutely brilliant, challenging us all about how we learn over the last few days, but what we're going to do tomorrow. It's really apt that we've got all of our risks. We know what we're doing. You give your feedback. You've really made us think, haven't you? Because that wasn't our top. So we're going to work with you to make sure that the risk profiling's right and it future-proofs all of us as we move forward. And I'm going to leave you with this. He said on the main stage today, I want you all to lead everyone, and lead everywhere, all of the time. That's what I want to give everybody to take back to your locations. Tech Cymru, when you go back to Wales, and we've got to lead everywhere. So before we go, we've just launched our Tech Action Alliance. Now this is where we bring partners together, and it's about action. So it's about TSA stepping out of their comfort zone and taking their partners in the tech industry to new industries. Partners in health and social care, and you can see some of the partners on there aren't our usual people that are in the business. Microsoft's one of them as well. So we'll be working with our colleagues and coming to speak to Tech Cymru in Digital Office in Scotland about how we can start taking some of those things forward. But this has been great for me. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I hope you've learned as much as I have. And let's lead everybody, everywhere, all of the time. You are doing a fantastic job. Thank you. Have a safe journey home.